history goes on and things change, but it's hard to forget some of the things that you're involved in, and then by the same token, collectively it's so easy to forget. But from the Depression days, the fall of the banking system, the Depression that followed, the war that got us out of the Depression but also created other issues, the people who made money off of the war, the people who sacrificed their lives for our freedom, those who were in leadership positions making important decisions regarding the future and the defense of our nation. And then when the war was over, and we think about the men and women who trained here at Camp Gordon Johnston, were involved in so many of the campaigns in Africa and in Normandy and France and over on the Pacific. It's just so interesting and something we need to continue to perpetuate in our memories. And most of the ones even in World War II action have gone on now. And those who were even involved in Cold War are diminishing in numbers. And I hadn't really thought much about the Ground Observer Corps until probably the last 2 years. And I mentioned it when something came up about it, and my family they knew nothing about the Ground Observer Corps, and they seemed to be interested. Some of them did. So that's kind of the purpose of doing this, is I wanted to share with them several things about the connections between business world and where we were in the tung oil plantation and the value of tung oil in that time. And of course now it's Furniture Preservations from Formsby's that was in Monticello who started that business. And connection with Newport shipbuilding and inventions of electric motors and automatic transmissions and fans to keep us cool. And we live in here near Apalachicola where air conditioning was developed. So World War II and the Cold War era, and this is a collection of mine of some images that I've saved over the years, and some even more recently as I've gotten into some of the research. Anyway, I've just been interested in the contributions of our area, particularly here in Carabel with Camp Gordon Johnston and Camp Bell and all of the things related to that helped our nation prepare to win World War II, especially the D-Day invasion. Just fascinating to me. So this is just preserving some things that I treasure, and maybe some of you will too. I'm grateful to Miss Gladys Murray, who gave me quite a bit of valuable things from Camp Gordon Johnston, a map and pictures and stories and so forth, as well as a lot of history of Carabel and the fishing industry. Here are some images that were given to me by Miss Gladys. Some people who worked out there have also shared this with me, so I'm not sure this is from Miss Gladys. There were quite a few that shared with me over the years who've all gone on to be with the good Lord now. So here's a picture of Camp Gordon Johnston, part of it in 1942 to 1946 was this active time here, and some more scenes of the barracks and the camp. This is out near Lanark and St. James area, and just you'll see various pictures of the camp, which was quite impressive to me, thinking of the size of it and living here now. And but it was quite an operation and quite a valuable training site for the military. There's more pictures of the camp. It's just fascinating. I wish I had recordings. I know that the museum, the Camp Gordon Johnson Museum, has some, and I'm sure probably the Carabel History Museum has some. But the stories that people who worked out there and some of the people who were stationed out there are just absolutely so interesting, and the conversations that some remember, and the little instance that happened when the place was decommissioned and people were leaving. A lot of the soldiers were leaving their patches with a little girl that was there who kept them. And Miss Bobby Winchester, who worked out at Camp Gordon Johnson Museum a few years ago, was telling me about that. It was a first-hand story to her. Here's some more scenes of the Camp Gordon Johnson. I believe you can see the railroad that's going back there, and they had kind of reinvigorated the railroad and used it as part of World War II training effort and supplies and transportation to Tallahassee and back. Some more scenes, and another. Those cars pretty well dated too, don't they? Interesting. To me. Here's some more of the facilities. And the barracks, most of the barracks for the enlisted men had sand floors, from what I understand. There's the chapel of Camp Gordon Johnson. More scenes of the barracks. Can you imagine in the summertime? Can you imagine in the wintertime? Bug season, snake season, cold seasons. I guess that was a tough training. That's why part of the reason it was called Hell by the Sea, by one of the books that's written about it. And I think this is the final one of the camp from our major World War II connection with Carabel, Lanark, St. James, and D-Day invasion, and many amphibious landings and efforts during the war. And that's an approach from Lanark down to the Gulf. This is an authorization paper that my grandson Michael Register got when he donated to the Camp Gordon Johnson Museum an artillery launcher that he found in our backyard. He was real happy to turn that over, and he knew exactly what it was, to the amazement of most people. Now let's take a look at more modern day memories and artifacts. First, this is a artillery shell that was found out on the Oyster Bar. It came into my possession. That's used to be a pretty frequent find, thing similar to that. And then a canteen that was from World War II. I found at the bottom of the base of a oak tree out in my backyard, and it still had some of the original wrapping around it when I found it, but it was kind of deteriorated, and it was a U.S. military assigned canteen. And then annually, thanks to the Camp Gordon Johnson Museum Association, we have a weekend of Camp Gordon Johnson celebrations. And in the beginning of that, when they started having, had quite a few of the soldiers who trained at Camp Gordon Johnson who attended. And obviously, as time has gone on, that number has diminished. But they do a great job of continuing and keeping up the great memories of World War II and honoring the men and women who served there. So just take a look at some of these pictures, which are from one of the Camp Gordon Johnson Days reunions. To another thing that just happened to be a connection in my life. There's a shipyard at Newport, Florida, in association with the military and the World War II action and afterwards. Newport, Florida was the site for building of naval ships and small sizes, and I might add later to just building fishing vessels. And in the early 1950s, I heard stories from people in Capps, Florida, where my family lived, about the owner of Tungsten Oil, where my dad worked, also having some connections with the shipyard in Newport. Later years, I moved to Carabel, and long after the tung oil business had gone defunct, and we had actually moved to Alabama, and then after college, I came back to Carabel to teach, and I was on a trip and traveled through Newport, and immediately I saw some very familiar-looking buildings. The buildings there, many of them, including some houses, were built exactly like those that were so common in the tungsten housing and the tung oil mill of my younger days in Jefferson County, Florida. So that made me think about what I had heard in my early years, because there had to be some connection, because they were exactly the same. Some internet searches led to some oil drilling and government contract articles of the ventures of the owner of the former tungsten plantation, Mr. Everett P. Larsh. Mr. Larsh was a prolific inventor and produced many patents that will be reflected in some forthcoming slides. That's all I've been able to find, and it's probably enough for my curiosity, as it is obvious that there were some connections with all these activities. Here you see from the Florida Memory Collection an aerial view of the site of the former Newport Marine Industries shipyard on the St. Marks River in Newport. And here you see a historical picture of the previous shipyard that was in the 40s and earlier probably. And another view of a part of the shipyard. And that's another view, and you can see some parts of the working yard there. And finally another picture of the boatyard. Further looking at Mr. E.P. Larsh, who, by the way, I've talked to quite a few times. He came to Capps. He had a house there, and he had somebody taking care of it. And he would come a few times a year, and I think at that time he lived in his primary residence was in Dayton, Ohio, and he had a place down in Miami. But he would come and visit the tung plantation from time to time. and was a really interesting gentleman, friendly, and just very impressive to me. Of course, I knew that he was rich, and I guess that impressed me. But he was a machinist by trade and an engineer, and my dad was a machinist there at the Tongue Oil Plantation, so they had a lot to talk about. Here are some connections between Mr. Larsh and Tungsten Plantation and the military. One example is that the Navy purchased a yacht that Mr. Larsh owned and converted it to a warship that was sent to Pearl Harbor. It's called the Rhodolite, was what it was named after it was converted. And it was built in 1931 for Goodyear and Hollander by the Bath Iron Works in Bath, Maine, and was purchased as a yacht called the Seapine from Mr. E.P. Larsh in 1941. In Tampa, it was converted to and commissioned as the Rhodolite, and Lieutenant George Reith was in command. It was assigned to the 14th Naval District. The Rhodolite departed Tampa on the 26th of March and arrived at Long Beach a month later. Delayed there by repairs until the 25th of May, she arrived in Pearl Harbor June the 2nd and reported to Commander Hawaiian Sea Frontier for inshore patrol and escort duty. Shifted to weather patrol duty in 1943, she remained in the Hawaiian area until after the end of World War II. In November 1945, she sailed back to the West Coast and reported for inactivation at San Diego. Decommissioned 29 December 1945, struck from the Navy list 21 of January 1946, she was turned over to the Maritime Commission for disposal in February of 1947. And this is more about the Seapine that was, and it's basically the same information I just read is there, but this is from an actual publication. Tongue Oil Plantation, Tungsten Plantation in Jefferson County, Florida. This is from a news article, I believe, from the Monticello News, but it's by Susie Reams. And in Jefferson County, there once was a plantation that was its own town. The plantation was located in Capps, Florida, just a couple of miles south of Monticello. I can tell you it was 10 miles because I walked it from football practice a few times. It was the Tungsten Plantation, but before the 1970s, Capps wasn't always known as Capps. The Tungsten Plantation was a very popular and eventually grew its own town, a town that would be named after the plantation it surrounded, Tungsten. The Tungsten Plantation was one of the largest plantations in the United States that belonged to a single ownership. The Tungsten Plantation was owned by Everett P. Larsh, who was an industrialist from Dayton, Ohio, and the plantation was managed by Mr. Lawrence Crampton. Here's a press photo of the tongue crushing mill that was owned by E.P. Larsh, and that was in Capps, Florida, and had some beautiful horses and black Angus cows, and there was a baseball field that the Capps team, Tungsten team, I guess it was, played, and the water tank that some of us young folks climbed, and nobody wanted us to do that, and most people didn't know we did it, huh? Anyway, that wasn't good. It was a fun time. And this is a picture of the plantation itself, and you can see the tanks that were a very familiar sight for years as people drove down Highway 27. And then just to the north of, or I guess it's east of there, was the mill itself, and then the electrical plant which is a block building, and then the office area.